for the American Peace Corps students those days, using a lot of spoken Tamil materials, whatever we have produced those days by Professor Shanmugam Pillai, Professor Agasthilingam and others. But now we have a lot of other materials also, but I don't think those materials are adequate for modern use. We have to change all those materials and introduce the computer technology or modern technology to assist. That's why we call computer-aided language teaching is also important, in addition to whatever theoretical or other materials we have. So all these areas, Dr. Annamalai involved himself, has helped scholars and students, researchers in different parts of, not only in India, but also at least in 10 countries, in 10 to 12 universities, I see materials and his publications published by 10 universities of different kinds. So we are really proud of such a wonderful scholar. We miss him because he's in America, but that doesn't matter. Nowadays, you know, one can impart the knowledge through different media, the electronic media. I think we have just started using this media through which we can take our message to the population wherever we are. So linguists have a definite role to play. They have to use proper materials, proper approaches in order to make themselves perfect in their work and also their contributions. So we depend on scholars like linguists or other young scholars to come forward to take up good projects so that you can impress the society and the people, especially in higher education, and do something good for the developing society like India. We all feel proud of our Indian academic population, research population. We have worked on so many projects. I know Government of India has given us a number of projects for us to undertake and do something good for the development of modern languages, modern Indian languages. Annamalai, Dr. Annamalai is interested, I know, in modern Tamil. He has defined modern Tamil also in our publication. So I am happy Dr. Annamalai has accepted our invitation to give a special lecture on the topic, and I welcome him wholeheartedly with all your support and wishes. So now I give it to the secretary and his office to invite Dr. Annamalai for the lecture program. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sir, I request you to present your paper, sir. Your speech, sir, please.
What did you say?
So shall I change to speaker view?
No. You please start, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my fellow linguists, I'm happy to be in your midst this morning here and this evening to all of you. It's a long time since we all met. And in these days of having less and less face-to-face meetings and communications, this technology has helped us to see your faces. I see some old faces and some new faces, and this is a good opportunity to know about the old linguists as well as the new linguists who are coming up in the field. I'm happy that you have revived the old Tamil Mozhiyiyal Kazhagam into Tamil Mozhiyiyal Sangam. I hope that this is an opportune time to revive linguistics in Tamil Nadu, revive in the sense of creating more interest in this subject, and also to apply for the development of Tamil, making use of linguistic knowledge we have. I thank Dr. Karnagaran for his very nice words about me. By the way he described me, you would have realized, if you already do not know, that I'm the oldest guy around in this meeting. So I have been around for a long time, and I have also, as Dr. Karnagaran said, have different kinds of interests. In a way, I wear different hats. I'm happy for this opportunity given by the Sangam to sort of talk about linguistics. See, for the last 10 years or so, my concentration is more on Tamil studies at the University of Chicago. Just in the quarter which ended, I read with the graduate students one of the Prabandha texts called Panavidu Thudu, and earlier than that, we read Sivanyana Muniva's commentary on Tolkappiyam. So from that, this has given me an opportunity to talk about modern linguistics. I have chosen multilingualism as the topic, which I would share with you my ideas about the nature of multilingualism and how the studies of multilingualism developed in the past half a century or 3/4 of a century. So I'm not going to spend much time on language policy and planning issues, but I would talk mostly about what multilingualism is as a phenomenon, and particularly I want to draw your attention to threat to multilingualism in this. Pardon me?
Some interpreters, sir, please go ahead, sir. We will stop. We will move down. Some interpreters, please go ahead.
I think sir is mute, sir.
Sir, you have muted your voice, sir. Please unmute it.
Please unmute
it. Sir, you have muted.
Yeah.
Now you go ahead, sir.
As I said, the many hats I wear, we all know that the linguists look at language from multiple points of view. Basically, there are two points of view. One is to look at language as a codifying a structural system, and the other is to look at language as a social function. So the former is called the formal linguistics, and the later is called the social linguist. So I will wear the hat of the social linguist. I say the one crucial difference between the two categories of linguists or linguistics is that the formal linguist normally looks at single language. Occasionally, he would or she would look at the comparative and contrastive aspect, which involves more than one language. But social linguists would look at primarily on more than one language, a minimum of two. So multilingualism is a very natural object of study for a social linguist. Social linguist also would concentrate on a single language when she studies the use of language in social contexts or variations within a language, etc. So let us look at what what multilingualism is as a phenomenon. One way of looking at multilingualism, which we find plenty of in literature, is to look at multilingualism as talking about multiplicity of languages. So we have census, which is one good example of recording the multiplicity, not only of the languages, but also the speakers of these languages and the decennial difference between in the number of languages and the speakers of languages. This is one aspect. The other aspect is to look at multilingualism not merely as a numerical phenomenon, but as a political phenomenon, as having multiple layers of language organized within a political structure. So, so it's not about the number of languages, but it's a number of languages which relate to each other socially and politically. From this point of view, then study of multilingualism also becomes a study of political linguistics. So I would give a brief historical background of the study of multilingualism around the globe. The earliest study of multilingualism is squarely in this in the political context I mentioned. This is the study of the plurality of languages in the newly liberated countries from colonial rule. So these are studies of post-colonial countries which were multi-ethnic and multi-linguistic. So the task at that time was to build a nation out of the political entity with colonial rulers put together. In other words, it is a task of building a nation. The question which was faced in the which was underlying the study of multilingualism was how to build that nation in two senses. One is how you make the people of different ethnicities and different languages share an allegiance to this new nation. So allegiance, the sharing is in the sense of Anderson. It is imagine that the people in a nation share some common things. And one of the important things with regard to India is that the shared notion is multilingualism. It's not this language or that language. So all the citizens of India share the notion that the nation is multilingual. The other aspect of this study is how to make a new nation function. See how the government as well as the institutions of the new nation function. One of the important aspects of the function is how communication takes place with the government and the citizens of the new nation. So this was the impetus of studying of multilingualism in the after the Second World War. There was, of course, interest in multiplicity of languages even before independence of these countries in Asia and Africa. We all know about the Grierson's survey, a linguistic survey of India, but there the focus was on language diversity. I would differentiate the study of language diversity from the study of multilingualism. The language diversity comes from the interest of the colonial rulers to know the country they rule, and one of the things they want to know was how many languages were there and what their history was and all that. So so this is a sort of information gathering exercise from a multilingual situation. The motive of this is not about increasing communication between speakers of different languages, but it is how to control the subjects of the colonial government of people speaking different languages. So going back to the multilingualism studies in post-colonial countries, from the point of view of promoting stability. This is one important aspect of multilingual studies, is how you make a new nation stable, politically stable. So it follows from that then the interest in developing a language which would serve this function, and that ends up with the emergence of dominant language. So the multilingualism becomes concerned with what is a dominant language. It could be described with different names like language of wider communication and the language of majority. Often the language of the majority people turns out to be the dominant language, but not necessarily so. So the idea of dominant language is a concept which is an integral part of the study of multilingualism in the post-colonial country. So as I said in the beginning, any phenomenon of multilingualism could be understood only in terms of how it is embedded in a political structure and what the political relationship is between the languages. So what the new studies after independence do is to change the political matrix. Right? So this is some kind of multilingualism which I would call politically differentiated multilingualism. Right? If you take if you take India, the whole idea of categorizing languages took place during the colonial period, and which was strengthened by the independent government. I mean, all the names we know, like the language of administration, or the regional language, or tribal language, and all those categorization takes place. So when we are talking about the post-war situation, this is one aspect of it. The multiple languages in the newly liberated countries. On the other side, something happened with the colonizers' states. Right? Not the colonized states, but the colonizer states. So this was a period where you find the migration into these former colonial countries, and the migration of labor brought in many languages with them. And so the study, we all know about the studies conducted in the United States about the Spanish migrant and other migrants who came into the country. So the focus there was how to help assimilation of the new linguistic minority into the existing political arrangement with languages. So I would say that in these countries, unlike the post-colonial countries I mentioned earlier, a dominant language already existed. Right? So the idea was how to make the newcomers learn or assimilate with that dominant language. Of course, there was interest in the study of keeping bilingualism primarily of the migrant and migrant language and the dominant language. But I would say that it was of secondary endeavor in the study of multilingualism in colonizer countries. If you go back earlier, the multilingualism existed in an entirely different way in these colonizer countries when slaves were brought from West Africa, and the native Americans who were living in the US or Australia and places like that. So it was not viewed as a phenomenon of multilingualism. It was more it was related more to how to conquer the land. So I would say that at that time there was no transactional relationship between the languages, which is crucial for any phenomenon of multilingualism. It's either to totally eliminate those communities or to totally absorb them into the main dominant community. So the related interest from the study of this kind of study of multilingualism is the notion of language endangerment. This also came out of the study of multilingualism. So this is briefly how multilingualism was in the pre-globalization period, and how they were dealt with not only by linguists, but also by the policy maker. Then what I'm trying to point out is that there are different kinds of multilingualism, and there were different approaches, and more importantly, there were different goals in the study of multilingualism in that period. Now we come to the period of what is called globalization, which is observed for over half a century, and basically the globalization means a globalized economy or a globalized market, a common market in which people who are physically distant could also participate. So the globalized economy basically enables the movement of capital, goods and services, and the labor from one nation to another. So you could see that at the earlier time of multilingualism in post-colonial countries, the nation building was crucial, and so the national boundaries were also very important. If you look at in linguistic literature, the locus of study of multilingualism was often the nation. It might come down to communities and then individuals, but the nation occupied a preeminent place in the study of multilingualism. So it's a nation which provided the location or locale for situating multilingualism. So when in the context of globalized economy, we find that the national boundaries get weaker. National boundaries get weaker in the sense that the decisions are, it's not only the decisions made by the national government, but the decisions made elsewhere in the global market also affect the multilingualism in the within the national boundaries. So this new system of economic and political interdependence, as opposed to the independence immediately after the Second World War, has a different impact on multilingualism. To just give you a few examples, I mean, the economists you might have heard talk about supply chains to aid production of goods, and the supply chains are located in different parts of the world, are located in different nations. And also you have a market, which is also consumer market, which is also integrated across nations. So the national boundaries sort of take a backseat in this kind of economic system. So it so happens that this the movement of capital in particular, and the movement of goods and services bring in globally dominant languages into the picture. It's not just dominant languages within a nation, but the dominant languages at the global level. English is one example of that, and because it is closely tied up with the economic model, these languages get a preferred place in the educational system. I mean, we all know about the demand for English. I mean, not only in India, if look at Europe, you find many universities have English medium instruction at higher education, either as a parallel system as we try to do in the primary school here. You have two streams of medium, and the European universities have two streams of medium, one in their languages and another in English, right? So, so this, I mean, when it comes to goods and services, the dominant languages travel with the goods and services. If you look at instruction manuals or things like that, so this gives a kind of receptive knowledge of the language. I mean, you will, we are surprised that knowing even a monolingual rural person in Tamil Nadu would be able to get acquainted with the words in English in his smartphone or things like that. This is purely receptive linguistic skills in multilingualism. And also you see increased use of Roman alphabet in these new technological devices. If you look at the social media, you could find Tamil written using Roman script. So this is one minor impact of the globalized economy and the information technology which aids this globalized economy. Right? So one difference in this kind of multilingualism is one, as I mentioned, there is a spread of receptive skills, receptive competence in the world's dominant languages, but also in addition, the multilingualism includes distant languages. Traditionally, the multilingualism is a grassroots multilingualism. One would know the language at the next door, right? Or in the job with which they are related. Now it is bringing in the languages which are distant, with which a speaker in his daily life will not come into contact. I mean, one good example of this from India is the inclusion of German in the three-language formula in place of the another regional language which national policy provides. There was a demand. It was not continued, but that's a different matter. But that's the way it is going. So multilingualism is not in the language of your neighbor or next state, but it is language which is globally dominant. And also this becomes more middle class centered. These are the this is the multilingualism of the people who are college educated. So so this also leads to the idea in multilingualism that in terms of the political and economic power, one language will do, right? So the political relationship or economic relationship between languages, multilingualism becomes kind of lopsided, right? So this I would call a lopsided multilingualism, which is taking place as a result of globalization. We all know that now in part of multilingualism, people might leave alone the work. If you take reading literature for pleasure, right? You will find the younger generations read more for pleasure in English than in their own home languages. So from the work, it extends to the pleasure. So paralleling the globalization which takes place across nations, within the nation, for example, in India, what is happening is parallel to that is could be called centralization. So India has developed, maybe from the 70s or 80s, a common market, right, for the whole nation. And the culmination of that common market is the policy of goods and services tax, which is common to the whole country. So this enables the movement of goods as well as the movement of capital from one linguistic region to the other, or from one part of India to the other. So but the effect on multilingualism is stronger when you talk about the labor movement to meet the needs of the common market. I mean, the recent crisis of coronavirus with regard to the migrant labor brought to the attention of how much labor has moved from one region to the other. In one estimate, 10% of the population has moved. This is a population of unskilled or semi-skilled labor. So it is an experience of many of us that if you encounter a security person in a high-rise building in Chennai or in big cities like that, you will have to talk with the chowkidar in some kind of Hindi, and that is the case with the construction workers in many places who have come from Bihar and Orissa. Hindi or a variety of Hindi may not be their first language, but they know it as second language. So the point I want to, or if you drive in a highway in Tamil Nadu, in the toll gate, you will face someone who can speak only in some kind of Hindi. So see, what has happened is this migration of internal migration of labor has brought a language like Hindi to the daily life of people in Tamil Nadu. So this is a Hindi which doesn't come from Dakshin Bharat Hindi Prachar Sabha, or it doesn't come from movies. It comes from the labor migration into Tamil Nadu, right? So this okay. So this is okay. There are many other kinds of multilingualism. I won't have time to go into, say, like the multilingualism that developed in Gulf countries. And I mean, the one crucial difference is that it is not migration of families, or it is migration of men for certain kinds of jobs and women for certain kinds of jobs. And so the family transmission of language is not a big issue, right? The family, when it stays back in India. And then another kind of multilingualism is of the diaspora of professionals in advanced countries. From my experience, I find that their competence or their proficiency in their home language, in the native language is sort of frozen, right? I mean, they are more resistant to changes. I mean, they seem to stick to the kind of ideas they had about the language when they left India. The last one is the refugee migration, and one thing we all know, the political ramifications of migration at the time of Pakistan partition or at the time of Bangladesh partition, and also at the time of civil war in Sri Lanka. Right? And this has not, I mean, this has political ramification, but in terms of multilingualism, I would say that it hasn't made any change in the multilingualism which existed. It's kind of replenishing the multilingualism which already was there. That is, there would be more Bengali speakers who came from Bangladesh, or there would be more Tamil speakers who came from Sri Lanka. I mean, it doesn't change the dynamics of multilingualism in Tamil Nadu. So, so there are these are other kind of multilingualism which with distinctive characteristics. Before I close, I would like to mention another political manifestation of globalized economy, which is increase in inequality of wealth, and also deprivation of jobs for the traditional workers in the country. This is very obvious in the United States, and that led to a kind of what's called the populist political movement, and they happen to happen to emphasize the nation. So, so this is a kind of reaction to globalization, which was weakening the national boundary. Now the political move is to strengthen the national boundaries, and so this would certainly have consequences to multilingualism for because of the simple fact is being conservative movement and building stronger national boundaries. It goes back to the earlier one of a nation having one religion, or nation having one language and things like that. So this would be a big threat to the earlier view of building a nation as constituted by multilingualism. I'm not arguing that it will lead to monolingualism. That is, there are other factors which would stop that, but it would accentuate the political relationships between the languages. So, as social linguists, I mean, we have to take into account the changed political map of the world as a consequence of globalized market or globalized economy, and how we could as committed to the preservation of multilingualism, not in terms of the number. As I said, I mean, it's not a question of number. I mean, India may not become a country of one language, but the way the language function in the political and economic spheres would be quite different. So I will stop here. We have just 5 minutes. Right? Yeah. Any questions? Yeah, we close.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, I am Narana Sabapati.
Yeah.
Very nice, sir. Very nice talk. I really congratulate you. And there is only one question. beyond globalization, in a country like India, we have tribal languages.
Yeah.
Tribe along with the other languages.
Yeah.
And what that kind of multilingual situation will affect the tribal language in the same criteria, or I think it will be a different kind of approach is needed for that, sir.
See, the tribal and other minor languages will have what they call here double whammy. Right? You see, they are already a double whammy. That is, they are already struggling against what is that national dominant language.
Yes.
I mean, in addition to that, you have global dominant language
Yes,
come into picture. I don't see any possibility of the so-called regional languages, which are also under threat from the global languages, to join hands with tribal languages to fight against the new dominant, right? So they would still like to dominate the tribal languages while they are being dominated by global language. So there would be two layers of domination rather than all dominated languages joining together to fight against the new dominant language.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I mean, dominance I define in a simple way that a language is dominant when one cannot do better in life without it. Right? So that is dominant.
Okay, sir.
You don't even have to go into the legal status and political status and all that. If the common population feels that to better their life they had to, they cannot be without it, then that is an expression of dominance.
Is it a political compulsion, sir? Political compulsion?
Political compulsion could be there, but so the if you look at the Indian scene and the demand for English, one could say that the political policy reflects the people's demand. Right? I mean, at least that's what the argument goes. So it's not that the political ideologies impose this. I mean, this is the people's realization of how the languages function within a multilingual system.
There are functions, there are functional domains of languages, so that maybe.
Yeah, functional domains of languages would determine the way the language attitudes are formed.
Nice. Yes, sir.
Professor, whether this classical status gives any lift to the language? Classical status, say for example, Tamil is classical. I'm Rajendran talking to you. Yeah. I like to know whether this classical status gives some kind of dominance to a language.
Yeah. So in language planning, we talk of two things. I mean, it's an old categorization. One is called status planning, and then is corpus planning. Corpus planning is basically how you equip the languages to perform the functions which are demanded of it. I mean, status planning is more complex, you see, which means giving a language to legal status, like this is the official language, or this is the language of course. I mean, that is one status. So I would say that conferring classical status to a language also belongs to the status planning. But the status might be enabling thing. I mean, you should have a legal status to get the resources of the state for the development of the language. But that is not the only one. I mean, that it doesn't mean that once you get a status, the resources of the state would be available to the development of language. So this status, I mean, it depends on how the status is made use of. See, to give a very extreme example, you are happy with the status of classical Tamil, but you won't vote for Tamil medium in primary school or high school or whatever, then there is no benefit from classical status. Right? It might have a kind of emotional status that it is a classical language, but when it comes to the real benefit to the language, nothing happens. So the status is meaningless unless it is made use of for the benefit of the language concerned.
Thank you, Professor.
Ramurthy.
Yeah.
Sir, you very nicely explained the chronological evolution of this multilingualism. My question is, there are two things, sir. The globalization moves around goods, labor. It's centered around market economy. Globalization is always realized through globalization. So when movement of goods, even though in English the global language, it will be realized in the local language in the process of localization. So by this way, our regional languages are benefited, I can say, by way of translating or some kind of adaptation. But in the case of movement of labor, as you said, it no way affects, it no way gives benefit to the local languages. So how do you perceive these things, sir?
Yeah, I was trying to stay from not making evaluative judgments about multilingualism, right? I was just trying to say that there are different kinds of multilingualism and they operate in different ways, and the results of different kinds of multilingualism are different, right? And your question is different. Can we evaluate one multilingualism is better for more languages than the other? That's also a legitimate question. But I mean, in one way, if you say that contact with more languages is helpful for the development of a language, then labor migration is also helpful. Right? So the ordinary Tamil worker will have contact or interaction with ordinary Hindustani speaker, and that might have some benefit to Tamil. Then regarding the movement of capital, I think it is not helping the local language, because the capital comes with the knowledge technology, ICT, and their language is the global are the globally dominant languages. And when that capital moves, and then say a factory is started in Tamil Nadu, then all the jobs of professionals would be in English or a language like that. At the factory floor, the worker would be exposed to some of the instructions and user manuals, that. You mentioned about translation, but so when this is through translation, then always it will be one step behind, exactly like in science. We wait for translations to take place before these languages are used in science. In that way, the benefit, you think, coming from the movement of capital and movement of goods and services also is not total.
Hello, Professor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Very well taken, actually. Your lecture is very interesting. Also, you have discussed something like the modern multilingualism with the advent of English education. From that point of view, I would like to discuss and also pose some some questions about that one. See, the ancient bilingualisms or multilingualisms have completely a different structure, different from that of the modern bilingualism and multilingualism with the advent of the colonial languages.
Yeah.
Particularly taking English, we are actually in most states, they are encouraging to have English as medium of instruction at the school level, right?
Yeah.
And what is happening, we can see that one. The earlier kinds of multilingualism is actually on the wane, and now people are becoming bilingual or probably better in English, and then actually losing very emphasis on even on their mother tongues. So in course of time, maybe I think not beyond 2 or 3 decades, we are going to be monolinguals in English rather than actually bilinguals or multilingual. So we will not be in a position to contain the ancient and the traditional multilingualism, and we are moving towards a monolingualism, and that would really kill our industry and the social structure in India. Don't you see these things?
Yeah, I see that thing. That's why I mentioned about the global dominant language, and the effect you mentioned is likely to happen. But what I predict is not total erasure of the home languages, but pushing it to a kind of kitchen language. Right? To say it will be needed for cooking, and it will be needed for marrying, or not marrying, sorry, cooking, and it is needed for dealing with some family events. And things like that. This is quite possible, but at the same time, see, when the dominance of English succeeds, in the sense that it is mastered by the majority of the population, that English also will change. So the question then would be how much Indianized that English would be, and how it would be fit into the multilingual schema of the country. Right? So if that becomes then what I call the functional distribution of languages may not end up in monolingualism, but a kind of different allocation of the function. Right? So it won't be like Sanskrit and the other languages. I mean, the Sanskrit has a very limited role, which doesn't have the economic and political power as it has the cultural power. In the case of English, it is not the cultural power, it is the economic power, and not so much of political power in the recent days. So we have to watch and see how this realignment of the relationship between the languages takes place. I still remember you mentioned in one of your talks in Hyderabad that if you look at the GDP,
your voice is not audible, sir. Please check the voice, sir. Your voice is not audible, sir.
Sir,
Sir, not audible.
Oh, it is.
It's like a cake. The cake.
Now it is okay.
It's audible. It may be an issue with your system.
Now it is okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
You can.
So if you look at GDP, the contribution of workers who had no English education is enormous. But we are not looking at that when we talk about economics. We talk about only about the GDP contributed by high-end services like software services and things like that. So the economic thinking also will have to change. See, what is the contribution to the economy of people who studied through our Indian language medium. If you take weaving or farming, so many other things. I mean, their economic production is not dependent on English. It is dependent on their own languages. But in economic policy, that contribution is ignored or sidelined.
That's right. Yes. Yes. Thank you, sir.
Vasu.
Sir,
I
one
have
more.
a question.
Vasu. Yeah.
Please.
So, in the context of multilingualism, we have to look at our the development of language from the perspective of how we use the language.
Yeah.
So we are forced to speak the pure Tamil. We are not allowed to speak the Sanskritized Tamil, and not the Anglicized Tamil either. And we are supposed to have an oratory skill. These days, what is your perspective? The Tamils are unable to keep up with that idea of using the pure Tamil and avoiding Anglicized Tamil and also Sanskritized Tamil. Does it have anything with the multilingualism we experience now? Is it possible at all in this context, with the multilingual context, with English and Sanskrit and Hindi and all, is it possible at all for Tamilians to develop an oratory skill in the way everyone wants?
So the okay, I mean, as a linguist, I would argue that influence of other languages in the grammar and the lexicon is not a bad one per se. Right? For language development, many languages make use of that. And the problem is the political power behind those who mix Sanskrit or those who mix English. Right? It is because of their power. I mean, these varieties of Tamil get better place or better reception. Right? So oratory is only one kind of thing. Right? So I would say that the development of Tamil is basically, in its basic elements, is the ability to express your experience in modern life. Right? If we want Tamil to be a modern language, then the language should facilitate your expressing the experience in that. That is not happening. If it happens when you use, say, whether it is translations from English into Tamil or you use the English words, then your listener has to be a bilingual to understand what you're saying. Right? So while we talk about the problems with the technical terminology, we forget about the terminological requirement which we face day to day, which come from politics or sociology and things like that. Say, for example, to talk about supply and demand, which is a so common concept, right? What Tamil words we will use, or we talk about civil society. See what words we will use, right? So if you use supply and demand, then the majority of the population may not understand what it is. I mean, that's the problem of Tamil development. How you make it accessible to a large number of speakers of the language, rather than how it is coded. See whether more Tamil words or more English words. I think that's a secondary issue.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Tamil change?
Yes, sir.
I can hear.
Yes, please. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. It seems to me that we have to make a distinction between formal multilingualism and informal multilingualism. These days we find informal multilingualism is less complex or no complex at all. But formal multilingualism in our country is rather problematic. Do you agree with that fact, sir?
Yeah, I would say I will revert your formal multilingualism is probably you mean a planned multilingualism.
Right.
Multilingualism that is planned through education system. And that totally ignores what you call the informal multilingualism. The informal multilingualism, as Kuchandani points out, that the language borders are porous and getting the message across is the important thing, and such things which govern the use of languages at the informal level are negated in a formal formal multilingualism. So that in a way discourages people to use the language. For example, I hesitate to use Kannada in Mysore because it is not the so-called standard or so-called formal. I mean, somebody might be happy that I'm not polluting Kannada, but in terms of language use, my use is reduced of another language. So I would say that the formal multilingualism should soften its rigidity to some extent.
Yeah, that's true. But our government we try to solve multilingual problems through formal multilingualism, not informal one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem. I mean, the language planners are not into the needs of the people. See, for example, a grocery merchant in Madurai gets his spices from Gujarat, right? He would benefit from the knowledge of Gujarati. I mean, Hindi could come because Gujarat speaks Hindi. I mean, things like that. The multilingual needs of the people are different from the perceived needs of multilingualism by the planners, right? See, for them, English is needed for everyone because it is needed for the middle class, for the professional class. Right? So this dichotomy is a factor in the failure of formal multilingualism. Right? So that also has changed, as I said in my talk. In those days, at least in my generation, we would be able to read for pleasure English fiction or Tamil fiction. But now the generation doesn't read Tamil fiction at all. Right? So they don't have the competence in doing that. So even though you call it multilingualism, formal multilingualism, it is going in the direction of formal monolingualism.
But in Tamil Nadu or in India these days, informal multilingualism is encouraged, is everywhere. People come from different parts of India and work, and they are able to get along. And I have observed closely also that they don't have any problem at all in understanding, in adjusting, everything going smooth. But for one or two instances. But
yeah, people do,
when it comes to
understand what
multilingualism, we find it for formally in language policy making, in parliament, in assemblies, always trouble.
Yeah, right. I mean, people understand multilingualism better in terms of its functions or in terms of its utility than the planners, right? So this dichotomy is a problem with multilingualism. See, I mean, the planned multilingualism through the education system is trying to make everyone in India speak some English, right? But that has its practical problem. We all know as language teachers, right? So there has to be some kind of matching between the multilingualism at the ground level and the multilingualism at the policy level. Yeah. Rangan had. I saw his yellow mark. Okay.
Sir, can I ask one more, sir?
Yeah.
Sir, can we look at the multilingualism in a different perspective?
Yeah.
We actually saw from the local language to dominance.
Yeah.
But I understand in some companies, in globalized companies, the dominant language companies, they ask their company people or ask people to learn the local language of the country in which they interested in their business.
Yeah.
And that is another way of multilingualism in a different perspective, reverse perspective. Is it?
Yeah, that has been happening. That has been happening right from the colonial period. I mean, the colonial government set up schools for in St. George Fort, for the administrators to learn the language. But the problem is, as I mentioned in passing, that the goal is to help control the labor. It is not to change the relationship between the labor and the capital.
But then the marketing, the advertisement, everything also they do it in their language, local language.
Yeah, right.
And so that there is no need for multilingualism.
They also make a difference. I mean, if you find an advertisement for a car, it's most likely to be in English. If it is for a detergent, it's likely to be in Tamil, right? So they address to the different consumer markets.
Yes.
Right? So that brings out the dichotomy, right? So the car buyers are not Tamil speakers. Right?
Yes.
I mean, that's the idea. Right?
Yes, sir.
So like Professor KK mentioned about practical bilingualism.
Yeah.
I can see that, we start getting more in the words these days. I see ulta, bus, instead of saying podum, talagira, so we are kind of, without our knowledge, we are changing our intuition of the language. So it's the Tamil intuition in a way. So what do you think about that? That practical bilingualism is okay, like Professor KK mentioned. Yeah. But we are really changing our intuition, our Tamil intuition. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that is, okay. See, normally as linguists we say that borrowing contributes to the development of the lexical wealth of the language. Right? That's a general position. But the borrowing also leads to the loss of existing words. Right? So the challenge is how to meet this. I mean, I personally experienced this. You see, when I write in Tamil or translate into Tamil, I had to search for words which have gone deep into my mind. Right? Yeah. When I speak, it's the English words which come. So there are Tamil words and they are in me, in my competence, but somehow they go down as in the stack dishes in a dishwasher, right? It's at the bottom. take it up. So the only solution, I don't believe in issuing decrees by the government, right? So you should use only this or that. I mean, they do it to some extent because they control the textbooks. Right? I know niece of mine, and I asked, do you have Saritram in your curriculum? Say, no, we don't have Saritram, we have Varalaru, right? So, so this kind of planning is possible when you control the institutions which deliver language, and school is an important thing. But when the child comes out of the school, he might say Ulta rather than Tarahira, right? So I don't know how to change the behavior of the people, right? I mean, that's a big challenge to sociolinguists. I mean, you can plan and you can implement plan by controlling the institutions to deliver your idea, but that has some limits, right? So so it would be I mean, the basic thing. It is hard to say. I mean, it's easy to say, but hard to achieve. To say is to change the attitude about Tamil. I mean, the common attitude is Tamil is a liability, English is an asset. Right? So as long as that attitude is there, you wouldn't take efforts to use the words you would like them to use. So it's a kind of behavioral planning which has to be done without the power which the language planners want to wield, right?
So the language planners should be in a way policing the language.
Policing language doesn't work. I mean, it worked to some extent as it happened in France and things like that with regard to French. But I think the language planners should have their ears on the ground and then be willing to make adjustments to that. See, they cannot just stand with their ideologies and then expect people to change to that ideology. Yeah, I think it's
Sir,
if there is no questions,
yeah,
or suggestions,
ask
we
Ramesh
go for vote of thanks, sir. Ramesh Kumar will.
Yeah, ask.
Sir. Sir. Sir.
Please go ahead.
Good
Ramesh.
sir. Okay, thank you, sir. Good evening to all. Good evening to all. I did a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this memorable occasion. Let me first of all, I thank to Mozhiyiyal Sangam President, Secretaries, Mozhiyiyal Sangam webinar committee members for attending this wonderful e-lecture series. It was indeed a privilege to have Professor E. ANNAMALAI, visiting professor, Department of South Asian Languages and Civilizations, University of Chicago, and former director of CAL Mysore. This insightful lecture on mobility, majoralization, and multilingualism was full of sociolinguistics and especially multilingualism. I feel the professor and the scholars who attend his lecture will be able to extend best of knowledge, different views on bilingualism, like historical based and globalization, political dominance, and educational. These are all the bilingual situation of He says, once again, I thank you, sir, for having spread your precious time for all of us. Finally, I would like to thank participant. Without participant listeners, there is no use of lectures. Every week we got more listeners. Today, this lecture, more discussion will going on. The knowledge is translated to, the linguistic knowledge is translated to all. Once again, thank you, sir. Thank you to all. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you for this opportunity. I request all of you to stay safe and well.
Thank you, Professor Annamalai. We have enjoyed your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So very nice, sir, to have seen you after a long time.
Yeah.
And listen to your lecture.
Yeah.
The nice talk, Professor. Nice.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice talk, sir. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
sir.
bye.
Thank you.
Hello, Professor Nathan Subhapati.
Yeah,
Hi, hello.
MYSORE, how is it?
Jendran, Ramurthy, and Jnanasundaram.
Yeah.
Lots of people. Yes, Professor Karunakaran. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all, sir.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.